Night my mother clinked her wine glass and said, loud enough for the table beside us to hear, "My daughter, the crossing guard." I was already seated at the wrong end of the banquet hall. Table 14. Against the east wall, close enough to the kitchen that I could hear the dishwasher running. No centerpiece except a small succulent in a terracotta pot with a printed card that said, "My name," in the default font you get when you don't bother choosing one. I had known about the seating for 11 days. What I hadn't known was what would happen when the woman sitting 2 chairs to my left, the woman my family had spent the entire evening pretending didn't exist, turned out to be someone my mother had spent 15 years trying to impress. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The Voss name in Clearwater, Ohio means one thing: medicine. My grandfather opened the first private cardiology practice in the county in 1974 out of a converted Victorian on Elm Street with 2 exam rooms and a waiting area that smelled like industrial carpet and ambition. My father built on that into Voss Medical Group, 3 locations, a research affiliation with the university hospital, and a reputation that guaranteed you a seat at every civic dinner worth attending. The practice website has a legacy page: grandfather in his white coat, stethoscope draped like a medal. My father receiving the county's Physician of the Year award, my mother beside him in a dress I remember her buying specifically for the photo. My brother Daniel at his residency match ceremony, flanked by both parents, everyone beaming. I am not on that page. Not because I didn't try, because at 22, when I told my family I wanted to study early childhood education instead of pre-med, my father set down his coffee cup on the kitchen counter with the particular careful quietness of a man choosing not to throw it. My mother's response came 3 days later, measured and precise, delivered over dinner like a verdict that had already been deliberated. "We just want to make sure you've thought about the ceiling, sweetheart. Teachers don't exactly have a lot of room to grow." The ceiling. As though a life spent teaching 6-year-olds how to read was something you'd eventually bump your head against and regret. I have been a first-grade teacher at Millbrook Elementary for 6 years. I make $48,000 a year. I teach 23 children how to sound out words they've never seen before, how to sit with frustration long enough to get through it, how to ask for help without shame. I have a student right now, a boy named Marcus, who came to me in September unable to identify half the letters in his name. Last month, he read an entire picture book aloud to his mother at our family reading night, and she cried so quietly that I almost missed it, and I had to excuse myself to the hallway for a moment because some things you can't absorb in front of people. My family calls it sweet work. The pause before sweet does most of the damage. The moment I stopped expecting them to come around was about 14 months ago. Our school was selected for a state literacy innovation grant, a competitive award given annually to 3 schools in Ohio. I had written the application. I had designed the reading intervention model they approved. I sent the notification email to the family group chat the afternoon I found out. My father replied 6 hours later. "Congratulations, kiddo. Is that the kind of thing that comes with a ceremony?" It did come with a ceremony. I didn't tell him that. I went with my co-teacher and my principal, and I shook the state superintendent's hand, and I put the framed certificate on my classroom wall above the reading corner, and my students asked me what it said, and I read it to them, and a girl in the front row said, "So, you're really good at your job?" And I said yes. And that was the ceremony I got. 3 weeks after that, my father was quoted in a regional healthcare journal about practice innovation. My brother Daniel was named a fellow at his hospital. My mother forwarded both articles to the family group chat with 3 exclamation points each. So when people ask why I never made a point of talking about Renata to my family, the honest answer is that they never created a space where she would have fit. They knew I had a close friend, a person I spent most weekends with, someone I mentioned occasionally in passing. My mother's entire inquiry, delivered last Thanksgiving between the sweet potatoes and the pie, was, "Is she a teacher too?" No. What does she do? She runs her family's landscaping business. A pause that lasted slightly too long. That's good for her. Honest work. Honest work. Said the way you'd describe something you respected from a safe distance. Renata Cruz runs a landscaping and grounds management company that her grandmother started in 1989, with a single truck and a contract to maintain the medians on Route 9. What it is now is not what it looks like from the outside. It looks like pickup trucks and irrigation schedules and a yard full of equipment on the edge of town. I knew early on that there were things about her business she didn't lead with. A call she took once, while we were at lunch, stepping outside and returning 12 minutes later having clearly just made a decision that involved a lot of money. A manila folder on her kitchen table once with a county commissioner's letterhead. A name I saw on her phone. A city council member I recognized from the news, listed under a contact labeled Green Space Proposal. I asked about it once. She said it was a bid she was working on, nothing finalized. I didn't press. It wasn't that I wasn't curious. It was that none of it changed the thing that had already mattered most to me. She was the first person in years who asked about my students by name. My brother Daniel's promotion celebration was held at the Harrington Room, a private event space on the 4th floor of the Clearwater Grand Hotel, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the river, a bar cart that someone had clearly put real thought into. 60 guests, mostly medical professionals, my parents' friends, a few of Daniel's colleagues. Daniel had been named the youngest attending in his department's history, and my parents had planned this dinner the same way they planned everything that mattered to them, thoroughly, visibly, and with a guest list that functioned as a status document. The most notable guest was Councilwoman Patricia Hurd, the city council member who chaired the Urban Development and Infrastructure Committee, and who had recently become the subject of considerable local press for a sweeping green space initiative she was pushing through before the end of the fiscal year. She was my parents' idea of the room's centerpiece. My mother had spent 3 weeks engineering the invitation. Renata and I arrived on time. She wore a dark green blazer over a black shirt, her hair pulled back. I wore a gray dress I'd bought for a different occasion and repurposed. My father greeted us at the entrance with the particular warmth he reserved for people he expected to require nothing from him. "Renata," he said, shaking her hand with the same nod he gave the parking attendant. I found out about the seating when I saw the place cards. Tables 1 through 5 were nearest the windows, the river glittering behind them. Table 1 had the kind of floral arrangement that has a name I don't know. Table 14 was beside the wall near the corridor to the service elevator. 2 tea candles. A small green plant that I realized later was artificial. Our names printed in the same font as the parking validation tickets downstairs. Renata looked at the table, then at me. I had told her everything on the drive over. I'd heard my mother on the phone the week before, in the kitchen while I was returning a casserole dish I'd borrowed. "Just put Laurel and her friend near the back. They won't be part of the formal remarks, and I don't want Patricia Hurd seated anywhere near a conversation about elementary schools. She's here for Daniel." I had stood in the hallway with the casserole dish for a full 30 seconds. "We can still leave," Renata said at the coat check. I thought about it. Genuinely. "No," I said. "I want to see it one more time with my eyes open. And then I'm done making excuses for it." She was quiet for a moment, then she straightened her jacket. Then we went in. The dinner moved the way these dinners always move, which is to say, it moved around the people my parents decided it would move around. Daniel was gracious and genuinely happy. His colleagues were warm. Councilwoman Hurd sat at table 1 and laughed at something my father said, and my mother looked across the room with the particular satisfaction of a woman whose plan was working. She glanced in our direction twice in the first 40 minutes. Both times her gaze moved across us the way it moves across the part of the room that doesn't need attending to. The third time, she stopped. I watched it happen the way you watch weather change over water. She had been reaching for her wine glass when she saw Renata, and her hand completed the motion on a delay, and then she was still, and then she said something to the person beside her, and then she stood. She crossed the room. Not glided. Crossed. With the directness of someone who has somewhere to be and has decided that this is it. My father noticed her moving. His expression shifted into the particular arrangement he used when he needed to look effortlessly prepared for something he hadn't anticipated. She stopped at our table. "I thought that was you," she said to Renata. Her voice was even, but the room was paying attention the way rooms do when the most important person in them changes direction. "I didn't put it together until just now." Cruise grounds. You're Rose's granddaughter. Renata stood. I am, Patricia. It's good to see you. I have been trying to reach your office for 6 weeks. The councilwoman said it without accusation, almost with amusement. Your project manager keeps telling me you're in the field. I usually am. My father had moved to the edge of our table's orbit. Patricia, you know. She looked at him. Warren? Then back to Renata, and then briefly to me, and then back to the room in the way of someone deciding how much context to offer. She offered quite a bit. Renata Cruz, she said at a volume the nearest 3 tables could hear clearly, has been the lead contractor on the Millbrook River Corridor restoration for the past 2 years. 41 acres of degraded green space along the eastern bank. Her company did the soil remediation, designed the native planting plan, and coordinated with the Watershed Authority on the drainage restructuring. She paused. She has also, for the record, submitted the most comprehensive proposal I've seen in 12 years on this committee for the city's southwest green space expansion. 14 blocks, community gardens, pollinator corridors, a public orchard. Another pause, this one briefer. We've been trying to close that contract since February. It keeps getting delayed because she insists on a community input clause that requires 3 neighborhood meetings before ground is broken, which is honestly the most inconvenient and correct thing I've ever seen in a municipal contract. She looked at Renata with something close to exasperated respect. She also, as a point of interest, provides pro bono grounds maintenance for 7 Title I schools in the county. Silence. I felt my father turn toward me, but I was already looking at my mother. She was looking at the tablecloth. Renata spoke without raising her voice, the way she does when she means something completely. I didn't come tonight to make a point about anything. I came because Laurel asked me to, and because she matters to me. She glanced at my parents with the calm of someone who has already decided she has nothing to prove to them. She's been teaching in this district for 6 years. She wrote a literacy grant that's changing how 3 schools teach reading. She has students who come back to visit her classroom after they've moved on, because she's the reason they stopped being afraid of books. She looked at my father specifically. I know more about your daughter's work than you do. That's not because I'm exceptional, it's because I asked. The silence was not uncomfortable for Renata. I could see that. It was uncomfortable for everyone else. Then I stood. My voice was steadier than I expected it to be, which surprised me enough that I noticed it. I've been adjusting myself to fit inside this family's idea of what counts for a long time, I said. Not just the big moments, the everyday ones. Every time you described my job to someone by saying, she works with little kids. Every time Daniel's news got the full announcement and mine got forwarded to me later. Every time I sat at a dinner like this and pretended not to notice the geography of where I'd been placed. I looked at my mother. I know you love me. I also know that love and respect are different things, and you've been offering me one of them. I reached down and picked up my bag. I'm not angry. I'm just done being patient about it. I looked at Renata. Let's go. We walked out through the room while 60 people sat in the particular stillness of people deciding whether what they just witnessed was as significant as it felt. It was. The call for my brother came 4 days later. He sounded like himself but quieter, which with Daniel means he's choosing his words carefully. Councilwoman Hurd had apparently mentioned the evening to a colleague of my father's during a separate event, not unkindly but specifically. 2 of my father's hospital board contacts had sent emails expressing that they hoped everything was well in the family. The woman who ran the medical group's charitable foundation arm, a woman my mother had cultivated for years, had asked my mother at a junior league luncheon whether she'd seen the feature piece on Cruise grounds in the Regional Architecture and Design magazine. The one with a full profile on Renata's River Corridor project and a quote from the councilwoman calling it the most ecologically intelligent urban restoration she'd seen in the state. My mother had not seen it. She had to look it up in the car on the way home. Daniel said he was sorry. I believed him. He'd known what was happening for years and had done the comfortable thing, which was to stay inside the current and not interrupt it. He said so directly, which cost him something, and I respected that. What do you want from them? He asked. I told him what I'd already been thinking for days. Not an apology that was really a request to stop the discomfort. Not a conversation that ended with everyone agreeing to move on. I wanted them to sit with what they'd done, not as punishment, but as information. I wanted them to understand that I had a life that was worth knowing about and that they had spent years choosing not to know it, and that I was not going to keep showing up and pretending that was a neutral decision. My mother called on a Sunday morning. She didn't start with a softening. She said, "I've been thinking about what you said every day since you said it." And then she was quiet for a moment. And then, I don't have a defense. I want to say we were just proud of Daniel, but that wouldn't be the whole truth. We decided a long time ago what success looked like in this family, and we never asked you whether it fit you. And then we spent years being confused about why you seemed to be pulling away. That honesty surprised me. I sat with it before I answered. I told her what it would take. Monthly dinners, the four of us, where Daniel's accomplishments and mine occupied the same amount of space. A conversation, one real one, where I talked about my work in detail and they listened without redirecting to medicine or money or what I could theoretically do instead. And at some point, a genuine attempt to know Renata, not as my companion or my friend, but as a person with a name and a history and a grandmother who started a business with one truck and changed what the east side of the river looks like. My mother agreed without negotiating any of it. The first dinner was awkward in the way that honest things are awkward when you're out of practice with them. My father asked about the literacy grant and I explained it fully, the whole model, the intervention tiers, the data we were tracking, and he listened in the way he listens to things he finds genuinely interesting, which I recognized because I grew up watching him listen to medical research. He said, "You built that?" And I said yes. And then neither of us said anything else about it for a moment because that moment didn't need anything added to it. Renata came to the third dinner. She and my mother talked for 40 minutes about my grandmother's garden in the backyard, which my mother has never been able to get quite right. And Renata walked outside in the November cold with a glass of wine and studied the soil around the raised beds and explained exactly what was wrong with the drainage and what to plant in the spring. My mother took notes on her phone. I don't know yet what this family becomes. I've stopped needing to map it. What I know is that I drove home from that first dinner and felt the specific absence of something I had been carrying so long I'd stopped identifying it as weight. It felt like putting down a bag you'd convinced yourself was just part of your body. Renata was already home when I arrived. She looked up from her laptop. I sat down across from her and I said, "I think something changed tonight." She nodded in the quiet way she has when she already knows. "I know," she said. "I could hear it in your voice when you called." Marcus read his second chapter book last week. He picked it out himself from the classroom library, a story about a dog who gets lost and finds his way home, and he read it cover to cover over 3 days and then put it back on the shelf very carefully and chose another one. He didn't make a big thing of it. He just moved on to the next one like that was what you did. I've been thinking about that. About how much energy I spent for years trying to make my work legible to people who had already decided what it was worth, and how little energy Marcus spent worrying about whether I was impressed. He just read the book. He just did the thing. There is something clarifying about being around someone, anyone, who sees what you're doing clearly and finds it worth seeing. I spent a long time in my own family feeling like a footnote in a story they'd already decided the shape of, and I kept showing up to that story and trying to fit inside it because I thought that was what you did with family. What I know now is that showing up and shrinking are not the same thing. You can be present without becoming smaller. It took me longer than it should have to understand that those were two different choices. So let me ask you something. Is there someone in your life you've been summarizing in one word, in one sentence, in a pause before you mention them, without ever sitting down to read the whole page?